Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of Toys4Engineers. My name is Larry Breen, and I'm head of health and life sciences at Nearform. Today, we're going to have a look at the health and the life science sector and have a conversation with some of the key players that we have within the region. Joining me on today's panel are David Byrne from UPMC. He's Senior Vice President of UPMC International. Jonathan Downey, who's Managing Director, our General Manager of Replyogen, and Patsy Carney, who's Director of Kinetic Labs, but also Chairman of Ireland's Southeast Development Office. Today, we're going to have a look at various aspects of health and life science. So looking at healthcare, looking at the pharma, biotech, MedTech side of the business, and see how all these pieces actually all come together and influence the future of where we're actually going forwards. Before we get into the main thrust of the discussion and the panel, what I'd like to do is get the panelists to give a brief introduction as to who they are and their company, and obviously the impact that they're actually having on the world for us today. Maybe if we start, David, with you.
Yes, Larry. So as Larry mentioned, my name is David Byrne. I'm the Managing Director for UPMC in Ireland, but also part of the UPMC International team as Senior Vice President. UPMC is University Pittsburgh Medical Center. We're a US academic health system, one of the largest integrated health systems in the US. We have over 100,000 people working for us, a turnover nearly of 24 billion at this stage. And our UPMC International division, including Ireland, is now a growing priority for UPMC to grow our health system and our clinical expertise internationally. In Ireland now we have close on 800 people working for us, 4 healthcare facilities, and we have ambition to be the largest health partner to the public health system. And that's something we're working very hard on. We believe that the healthcare service in Ireland could benefit from partners like ourselves. And we have a long history in Ireland of over 15 years providing that very partnership we look to grow. So nice to meet everybody.
Thanks, David. Jonathan, could you take us through you and obviously Replyogen?
Yeah, Larry, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Jonathan Downey. As Larry mentioned, I'm the Managing Director of both Artisan Biosolutions and now Repligen Corporation, the European entity of Repligen. So Artisan is, we're a specialist in single-use bioprocessing technologies, set up approximately 35 years ago. We were acquired in a deal kind of at the end of last year, in the start of December last year, which meant that Repligen are now expanding both the Artisan family of products and transferring some of the Repligen products into Europe and specifically into Ireland, and again, more specifically into Waterford, which is good. So we're on an expansion trajectory. So, you know, the biopharma sector has grown fairly exponentially over the last couple of years, not just because of COVID, but just because next generation biomedicines are important. So we're excited, about what we're going to be doing over the next I'd say the next 2 years in the southeast of Ireland.
Very good. Thanks, Jonathan. And Patsy, if you could talk to us a little bit about Kinetic Labs and your involvement there, as well as your position as Chair of Southeast Development Office. You're on mute, Patsy.
Apologies. Thanks, Larry, and thanks for having me on the panel. I guess I wear a number of hats at this call. My background is in pharma all my working career. And more recently, in terms of Kinetic Labs, it's basically a regional enterprise development fund backed entity that came about in the last really we went live this year. And Kinetic Labs is trying to build out the ecosystem in terms of life sciences here in the Southeast by offering lab space or clean room space for either startups, established companies in the region, or companies, FDI companies looking to start to make and establish a presence in Ireland. So it's located in Work Lab on the industrial estate in Waterford. Work Lab is collaborative office space, and it nestles nicely within that, where we have basically state-of-the-art clean room facilities and lab facilities, and they're available for short to medium term rental by these companies that may need those kind of services. And secondly, then I chair the Regional Enterprise Plan for 2024, which is driven by the Department of Enterprise through the Office of the Ireland Southeast Development Office, and that's heralding all the cats of all the stakeholders in the region to put a plan together in terms of building enterprise, building jobs within the region across the entire spectrum of where that might come from. So, and buried inside in that is quite a number of connections to life sciences and the pivotal role it does play now in the region. I'm in this region long enough, since 1990, when life sciences was really in its infancy here. We only had one or two players. And for those FDI companies coming in, you were telling little lies by telling them that there was a cluster of life sciences in this region, but now there clearly is, and it goes across the entire spectrum, which I think we'll probably discuss in a bit of detail here today.
Perfect. Thanks, Patsy. And again, just briefly for me, so why have the Chamber asked me to actually chair this? From a near form point of view, for those of you who are not aware of us as a business, we're a software development company. We obviously provide software development services to a range of enterprises across the globe and governments. Most recently, we're probably most well known for COVID response apps globally. So within Ireland, Europe, and the US, we build a huge amount of those. So that's obviously brought us very much into the whole health and life science market. And part of why I was interested to get involved in this particular panel, and again, taken from what Patsy just said, is looking at how we obviously build out those kind of ecosystems. So for today, and if you look at the mix of folks that we have on this panel, is we're looking at health and life science sort of from beginning all the way through to the end. So we're looking at therapy creation, how we manage it through the pharma, the biotech companies, how we actually bring it through clinical trials and bring it to market. And then as obviously we produce those products and get them out, obviously we need to then deal with clinicians and healthcare providers such as David's teams and those, and obviously execute that on out and into the patient and look at patient outcomes. So we're taking that kind of holistic approach, and part of the conversation that we wanted to have today between this group, and obviously we would encourage anybody who's viewing live to reach out to us. We do have some Twitter handles, so at WaterfordCC or hashtag Toys4Engineers to reach out and obviously throw any questions or suggestions, thoughts or observations, and we'll bring those to the fore. But what we're looking to do is kind of have that conversation and very much look at the whole point of collaboration. So as we can see here in terms of this panel, we have me from more from a digital software side of things. We have Jonathan, again, looking at the whole single-use plastic side of the market. Again, how are we actually manufacturing and bringing things through clean rooms, etc. We have Patsy from, again, that whole biotech pharma side of things, where we've actually looked at, creating therapies that are obviously going to have positive health outcomes and obviously drive improvement forward through that whole manufacturing and life sciences side of it. And then through feeding into David Byrne and the UPMC team and obviously other healthcare providers that are out there, is how do we actually look at therapy creation? How do we leverage those things coming in from health and life science? And then wrap that whole clinical support and everything else that goes around it and looking at the whole system. But then repeating the loop cycle. As Patsy identified from a Southeast perspective, if we go back a number of years, obviously there was a very small life science sector. We've seen the life science sector here grow, and it's a reflection of the global market for the whole health and life sciences sector. And it is about bringing more and more of that kind of collaboration together and actually how we actually drive it forward. So, that's the explanation for why we've got the panel and why we've got, such wonderful people actually to join us and that diverse mix. I think maybe if we start the conversation off, David, if I go to you. So we have all of these diverse players within the market. So as we said, we got therapy creations, research folks, manufacturing, delivery of pharmaceuticals and other therapies, through to your clinicians and consultants and everybody else that are providing all of that care. Key to it, I guess, and we're seeing a bigger demand for it out there, is data and how we manage data. Have you got some views and thoughts in terms of, what kind of shape are we in for starters? As if we just look at Ireland, but obviously it is a reflection of a global trend.
I think yes, data is very important in any business or any service, and healthcare is probably the biggest service industry globally. But if we want to bring it back to our own community in the Southeast, we have many different stakeholders in the provision of therapeutics or in the provision of healthcare service, and data around the patient. The patient is, if you like, the person that has a need at a particular time. So what's the patient's need? The patient's need is a therapeutic, or it's access to a general practitioner, or it's a primary care physician, or access to a hospital. So understanding the patient's pathway and the service that the patient requires or the needs of the patient is very, very important in terms of any stakeholder engagement. So if you put the patient in the middle and the data around the patient, you begin to see where the services and the stakeholders can begin to collaborate to provide that better service. You touched off therapeutics, you touched off clinical outcomes, you touched off data, research, service. All of those pivot around where the need is, the patient. And all of us are a future patient of some sort. And we know that we're living longer. We know that healthcare is best delivered in the community. We know that patients thrive and clinical outcomes are better in the community where they can get access to healthcare and various services as required and close to home. So that's a mission of UPMC. It's something we're very good at. We have an integrated delivery financial system. We call it an IDFS. We have a pay plan. We have a provider network. But also we're investing very heavily on the translational science side of it through our UPMC enterprises, where we're looking to develop from bedside to bench and bench to bedside, how the therapeutics can be developed around what the data is telling us, whether it's population health data or our clinical data from our hospitals. And we're very lucky in the US to have 10 years of clinical data from our electronic health records. So if you flip to where we are in Ireland, we currently find it very difficult to get access to real-time data. So if you want to deliver an integrated delivery system around the needs of a patient, you need integrated data systems. And that has to be real-time data. We tend to look at data on a research basis. So we say, let's take a cohort of 70 patients, and mostly we're looking at historical data. Mostly we're gathering it manually, and mostly it takes a long time for us to put it together. At that stage, the world has moved on. So if Ireland wants to keep up in the area of translational science and therapeutics and the delivery of a better healthcare service, we have to deliver and improve and implement better data systems. And all of that data is around our patients at the moment. We have very, very rich data in our system, but we can't get to it. And I believe the Southeast has a great opportunity to work together to create regional data around health and life sciences, that we don't need to conquer all of Ireland. We can work together as stakeholders in the Southeast, 4 or 5 public hospitals, ourselves with 2 healthcare facilities, the pharma, the life sciences, the general practitioners, primary care, and the community health organization. I can list them off. If we all work together, we'll actually deliver on the ability to get access to data. And as a result, we'll deliver on being able to implement better healthcare service delivery. And we can do that without working against each other. We can very much do it together by collaborating. So there's a lot in that, Larry, but the question on data will always come back to service to the patient and the needs of the patient. And we will all be a patient in the future.
No, absolutely. Thanks for that, David. Again, I think from that point of view, we've always all looked at data from the patient side of it, hospitals, electronic health records. How do we actually manage that data flow? How does your consultant get the scans they need to obviously diagnose you and sit in front of you? I think what's important, and Patsy, maybe if I could bring you in on this piece again, especially with your background within the whole pharma space. What we're seeing now is within that life science, and this is where the joined up is the more of that real-time data we can pull across. Is it fair to say that can really sort of seed the early pipelines for pharma and biotech and med device companies in terms of understanding the patient needs, understanding that kind of data. And we know that clinical trials are a big issue and a big cost and an important factor in terms of getting a therapy from concept to actually handing it over to David's consultant so they can actually prescribe it for patients. How does that data silo really work between healthcare side of it and then pharma and biotech?
Well, you actually used the word silo there. I think the last sentence, Larry, and I think that's one of it still remains one of those big challenges. I was very interested to hear David's view, and it sort of confirms, I guess, what I've seen, which is organizations like UPMC, embracing new technology to actually mine the data. Because if you mine the data in real time, then you get real time feedback loops and everything that goes with that. And as we move towards more personalized medicine, then that becomes an absolute essential thing, because, if you take it to the absolute extreme, it's the diagnosis, it's the data that's coming from the patient in real time, feeding to an actual manufacturing unit that's actually co-located, that's actually then in a position to develop a particular therapeutic that's specific for that patient. Well, if you haven't got the data moving at the speed it needs to move at, and it moves across that supply chain, then that's where we need to get to. So that's the absolute extreme. I guess my background comes from what we call small molecule development, which would have been a very traditional way of actually developing therapeutics and so on. Large scale clinical trials, again, as David said, purely on the basis of research. Small scale, I'm working through your phase 1, 2, 3, and 4 clinical trials to get to that endpoint. If anything, the pandemic has taught us you can actually begin to short circuit some of the very complex timelines and complex sort of data review and so on that we would traditionally been used to. You're now seeing, think a bit more thinking outside the box to actually. So how can you suppress those? How can you reduce those timelines and effectively get from concept to patient without compromising in any way patient safety? But it is down to, and to be honest, I guess, again, I come from small molecule, which is the chemistry type of products. We've now seen we're moving very much more into the biotech and biotechnology type products, which again, when we talk to Jonathan, there's a space that he works in terms of single-use systems and so on. As we're moving more into that, it's a completely different world. The research has stays with the manufacturing unit, whereas a small molecule world can be quite just get it made basically, and very divorced from the patient. I think where we're going now in terms of product development and moving up the value chain in that respect, then you're getting much closer to the patient and you're getting much more of a need to have those feedback loops in terms of data. So.
And do you think it's reasonable if you break down those silos, and obviously there's a big piece to be discussed around that piece, but if you break down those silos, we can get, you talked about short circuiting, but we can bring products, the right therapeutic results to market a lot sooner, a lot more efficiently. So beneficial to, the pharmaceutical companies themselves, but also more importantly, beneficial to patients that without compromising on safety, if anything, we're actually got a enhanced level of safety, we can get products to market a lot faster. Is that fair?
It is. Now you're going to have to, we talked about the sort of let's say the ecosystem that is the Southeast, but I mean, for that, you're talking about the global ecosystem, because from a clinical data point of view, you've got to get into ethnic groups, you've got to get into large data sets. You know what I mean? It can't be that for a development of any particular therapeutic, the power of the clinical trial is in the numbers that you can actually get to. But again, getting at that data, particularly with, I remember being at a conference there a number of years ago, and somebody from Teva, in fact, who would be based in Waterford, but one of the largest generic manufacturers in the world, who would say that in terms of therapeutics for any of the large population diseases, that there's probably 4 to 5 options there for the entire globe at this stage. Wow. Some of it's just about financial access, to be honest. And really where we're focusing on a lot of research is on much smaller patient population Well, some of that gets into then globally trying to find a sufficient population base to actually develop the therapeutics. So again, networking, accessing, and so on in a regulated environment such as we operate in, that, you know, that's where I think digital has to come into play. You know, the kind of things, again, you and I would have discussed in terms of where Nearfarm comes in, but getting at that pathway and not that image we have in our head of any hospital, which is someone going around with this big, large lever arch file of data that keeps getting lost.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Jonathan, I know in the past you and I have had some conversations around the whole thing of data, and I guess one of the challenges, I guess, so the technical challenges are relatively straightforward. And obviously, hey, I've got the Nearform hat on, so I can say that you know, that technology stuff is relatively easy. I'm sure the guys that actually do all the work behind the scenes at Nearform would kill me for saying that, but I think we've got that side of it cracked, and we can drive that forwards. One of the challenges that we've kind of thrown around, I'd be interested to get the panel's view on it, Jonathan, was around how do we get competitors? So again, it's a very competitive market out in the whole life science space, more so than I think within the healthcare. So how do we get folks to actually share the right levels of data such that it's you know, beneficial for all, rather than if we break down the silo between healthcare providers and you know, therapy provider, you know, creators. How do we actually get therapy creators, so pharma, biotech, med device folks, to again share some of that data that helps move it all forwards, rather than having 4 or 5 competing companies all sitting in isolation? Is that a realistic expectation, or is that just shooting for
Larry? That's a great question, and this hopefully will resonate with Patsy with his experience. So what I've learned, I've worked in medical devices for years. I've moved into pharma, and what I've learned about pharma is that there is a deeply rooted paranoia about data. So I'm going to come at this from a slightly different angle to the guys, in the sense that we manufacture for the pharma companies. We manufacture their equipment, et cetera. And they are absolutely paranoid. There is an appetite within Ireland, certainly, for collaboration. But then once you talk to them about collaboration, the shutters go down. And I'll give you an example. We ran a conference in December, Interfex, which is a big conference over in New York. Didn't go ahead. So I went to our company ownership. I said, look, give me a budget. I'll run an online conference. Everybody signed up. One of the big pharma companies, now I mean everybody in Ireland, you know, the Regenerons, Wuxis, etc. One of the big pharma companies, I'm not going to name them, but they begin with a P, and they developed one of the vaccines. They rang me and they said, look, we're precluded from participating in the conference. But on the flip side, then there was like 70 or 80 people in their organization that sat in on the conference. So it was like kind of, we won't show you ours, but we want you to show us yours, kind of. So we've had an idea, and we're kind of developing it at the moment, where you could anonymize process data and load it up to the cloud. We'd facilitate that, and everyone would learn together. And ethically, everybody is saying, yeah, look, we really want to all work together. And that's, you know, that's what happened with the vaccines. There was a bit of collaboration. But, you know, those walls are still there, I think. And Patsy, I'd love to hear what your experience, you're far longer in this industry than I am, but I'd love to hear what your experience has been in terms of, you know, the intercompany collaboration or lack of collaboration. Because my experience has been that it's silos all the way, absolutely.
Yeah, look, I fully get it, and particularly with the big pharma guys. I mean, I would be coming at this from a background of predominantly not big pharma, but the generic space. And if you think they're paranoid in the actual big pharma world, when they start interacting with us in the generic world, yeah, the paranoia goes up another notch. But I think it's, you know, we do have to look at something like the pandemic, which is, if you have the burning platform, it shows what actually can be done. And I just think that this, the people will look to hold the life science community accountable going forward, and there's an expectation set now in terms of what actually is the art of the possible. But look, any of the big pharma guys, in terms of when we look at their research teams and versus their spend in terms of on legal and IP, they protect it because it is their IP is the value of the company. So you can establish some. I like that idea you put forward in terms of anonymized data and so on, because there's so much that they can actually learn that actually helps all ships rise. So it's trying to find, and again that takes us into that cluster discussion, trying to find the themes and find the areas of potential interest, which doesn't create issues for people in terms of disclosure of data that's actually proprietary. But they do take that level of paranoia to a completely unnecessary level. And in some cases, within the community that they operate in, they don't reach out enough to the community they're in. So they're actually operating in some degree of a silo, even within their community that they're in. And in fact, it would benefit the community and benefit everybody else if companies that are in the same space actually spoke more to each other. Some are very good, but some, I would fully agree with you, can take it to a whole new level of paranoia.
Yeah, no, I remember talking to Luke O'Neill, the now famous epidemiologist up in Trinity, and I asked him about the development of the vaccines. I said, is it going too fast? And he said, well, it's like this. Luke is a very practical guy. If you get 10,000 people, if you paint your house, it'll take you a week. If you get 10,000 people to collaborate together and paint your house, the likelihood is it'll be done in about 15 minutes. And that's what happened with the vaccine. I think now, as a novice, but he did explain to me that companies had actually collaborated for the first time to try, and yet then when they collaborate and when the IP is generated, the walls go up and the silos come down again. And that's the problem. I've seen it in medical devices, and now I'm seeing it in pharma, and I don't know what the solution is.
Yeah, David, you've seen this on the healthcare side of things, and you.
Perhaps I hadn't thought of this before, but can I pose a question maybe as well?
Sure.
So I think the role of a vaccine in a pandemic versus the role of personalized medicine in the future. So if you think of it, there was collaboration across vaccine because we had a pandemic. But we have a pandemic in cancer, we have a pandemic in cardiology, we have a pandemic in immune system, immunocompromised individuals, chronic illness. So I understand completely what Patsy's saying in relation to IP. And IP was still protected during the pandemic, even with the vaccine creation, remember. IP still is retained with individual vaccines, with the individual companies. But in the future, Patsy touched up it earlier when he said personalized medicine. And it is going to go to personalized medicine, and it'll go to genomics, and it'll go to screening, and it will be predictive in terms of percentage chance of you capturing or getting a particular illness. And there will be therapeutics that will be available to a certain cohort globally that can afford it, that will reduce that percentage or that chance of the illness occurring. So when it comes to pharmas and collaborating around a vaccine in the need of a pandemic, bearing in mind that there was not and is still not equity of access to the vaccine. We're talking from the privileged, corner of Ireland where we're at 88% vaccinated over the age of 12. But remember that in the future, we will have personalized medicine that equates to a vaccine for the ability to cure illness. And that's the way translational science and therapeutics are going. And pharma companies will behave the same because of IP and because of investors. But where we differ with our translational effort is we're a not-for-profit academic health system. We invest our funds back into the future of clinical services. We have $1 billion committed to translational science, 300 million committed to immunotherapy, because we work to develop these therapeutics of the future for personalized medicine and we're not protecting IP. So perhaps, it's a case of how you collaborate with stakeholders and how we define what IP is, and the role of investors in the development of therapeutics versus we know that the pharma companies that develop the vaccines are going to retain an awful lot of earnings out of delivering the vaccines for the next number of years, because there's a lot of the world that is not vaccinated yet. So the question is, can we, when it comes to healthcare and it comes to therapeutics and it comes to healthcare of the future in terms of developing these drugs and these services that we're going to require, well, perhaps it has nothing to do with the good people that are working to deliver it. It has more to do with the investors that are retaining the IP. And yes, it works. We work in a commercial world, but it doesn't mean that healthcare as a service has to remain in the commercial world. And I think that's what data will show us, that if we work to understand the service around the data, we will very quickly be able to see how we can improve clinical outcomes for the whole world based on equity of access. So, there's the pandemic will throw many, many different areas that deserve debate. And I think, when we start focusing on profit and retained earnings and EBITDA and IP, we're probably forgetting about the patient and clinical outcomes and the ability for us to affect care around the people that need it. So I think there's always a different world out there in relation to the caregivers versus the entrepreneurs. And we've seen a lot of that in the pandemic, and it's more than we could cover now in the next 10, 15 minutes. But as I say, I'm only shooting from the hip here. I hadn't thought about the comparison, but it's interesting when we're here and we're thinking about and talking about it. If we're going to focus on the patient, well, then it really throws a lot of questions out there about how we want to deliver that service. So again, shooting from the hip.
Absolutely. A great point, David. And I think, just to sort of coalesce it around, Jonathan, you touched, and we've all kind of touched over the last few minutes of talking. If we look at the pandemic and how were we able to achieve a lot of the things that we actually achieved? And I can speak from it from my point of view and having been involved with a lot of the global public health providers and stuff out there. There was profit, non-profit, enterprise, everybody at the table coming together. It was identifying clear rules of engagement, and I think that was what was quite remarkable to me. So we move technology, whether it's mRNA development, whether it's building COVID apps, whether it's creating equipment and PPE, on the fly. We've seen all that kind of innovation, but sitting behind that, what was very interesting is we saw would-be high competitors. If we look at the likes of Apple and Google, who are, publicly compete like heck, and obviously, are neck and neck and constantly fighting for space out in the marketplace, and rightly so. They were able to coalesce around this common good of actually driving forwards. In this case, it was a response to the pandemic. David, I think your point is, it is about patient outcomes and driving patient outcomes. And we do know that we already had a health challenge ahead of heading into COVID. COVID has exacerbated that, and we're going to have an even bigger one as we come out the other side of it, that we're going to have to address. And that's not a problem that's going to get smaller unless we box more cleverly. And I think from that point of view, I think there is a part for nonprofits and public health providers, as well as looking at the enterprise side of it, making sure we do things in such a way that we're not infringing on people's IP, we're not diminishing assets, and it's not about not focusing on the patient. We recognize, and we need to all recognize that we need these companies out there to make the returns for their shareholders, so they're investing back into the next set of therapies, taking the next risk in terms of what could be an outcome for it. But how do we lessen their risk so they maintain their returns, but at the same extent, get a better patient outcome? I think on that point, what we'll do is we'll move over. We got a small little segment just for a few minutes about some local companies. Let's run that session, 5 to 8 minutes. And then we'll circle back for the final part of the panel discussion. It was important that we had the right quality of staff, ecosystem and environment to work with, and obviously the Southeast was delivering that.
In terms of the quality of life down here, yeah, I love it. So in the summertime particularly, I'm able to get to the beaches after work, which is absolutely brilliant.
Kilkenny is at the heart of the agriculture knowledge and technology in Ireland.
Going through the country looking for some great locations, and we settled on Waterford and Sligo for obvious reasons. They're beautiful places, they have great culture, great technology institutes, and a great opportunity for us to expand our services.
There's a strong agri-tech group of people available in the Kilkenny region, along with all the other agri-tech companies and the colleges, so there's a really strong pool of people for us to be able to work with down here.
We've got, as it stands at the minute, 101 ICT companies in the Southeast that are part of the Crystal Valley umbrella. Having that community where you can actually talk and discuss with peers, bounce ideas, look for tips and hints, get mentorship and give mentorship, it helps everybody rise within the whole sector.
The quality of life here in Waterford is great. It's very easy to get around. The people here are very kind and opening and warm-hearted. I couldn't be more pleased with moving to Waterford, and it feels like home.
At the present moment, if you're a business in Waterford, and especially a small business, you are probably confused, possibly overwhelmed, and certainly unsure about what to do next. You are also probably feeling very much on your own. You are not. What the local enterprise office is saying is please contact us. We are here to help. Your own health at the moment, the health of your family and the health of your employees are obviously the absolute priorities. But the health of your business into the longer term is also important, and we are here specifically to help you on that one.
As a business owner, you may have questions around issues such as HR, finance or general business. So with this in mind, we are offering a service whereby you can call our office with your query and a specialist in that area will get back to you very quickly to discuss. This is a confidential service and is open to all businesses. We can also signpost you to other supports.
As of today, the 18th of March, the government has announced a number of assistances for businesses as COVID-19 escalates. These include the increase of the maximum loan available from Microfinance Ireland up to 50,000. Please talk to us if you want to apply for a Microfinance Ireland loan. The COVID-19 Working Capital Loan Scheme that's available through the Strategic Banking Corporation of Ireland. There's also the Credit Guarantee Scheme, where there's an 80% guarantee by the government on loans through participating banks, which include AIB, Bank of Ireland and Ulster Bank. Please apply through these banks for this loan scheme. The Department of Employment Affairs and Social Protection are offering shorter working payment schemes for those that have been put on shorter working weeks, and for those unfortunate people, either employees or self-employed, that have been laid off. There's the COVID-19 payment that's available for 6 weeks while you apply for the standard payments. If you have a query or question, we're here to help and to try and steer you in the best possible direction. Please talk to us.
The business environment is changing daily, if not hourly. The local enterprise office is determined over the next while to develop and to deliver a set of services specifically designed to make the situation as manageable for the business community in Waterford as it possibly can be. Let us keep talking and listening, and that includes within our businesses. Keep all communication lines open. Look, we won't promise miracles, but what we do promise is to listen to one another. Mind yourself, and if you need a friend in enterprise, please give us a shout.
Why do we do it?
We do it for the patients, we do it for their families, their friends, and their loved ones.
We do it because we believe we can make a difference.
We do it for that one stranger who will go to the emergency room for chest pain because of our advice.
We do it for the woman who will get the mammogram during the appointment that we helped her schedule.
We do it for the man we helped quit smoking just in time to see his grandchild born.
We do it because every one of these patients is someone's parent, child, or sibling.
They are neighbors, firefighters, policemen, and teachers. Our patients are often vulnerable and seeking a friendly voice.
The smile we help put on their face may be the only time they smile all day.
We do it because going the extra mile means that there are strangers out there who are alive and well because of the care, empathy, and compassion offered by people like us.
We do it because we know how important it is to care for others.
We do it right because we know how much it matters.
You guys have been paying attention to that. We've been having a continuing interesting conversation behind the first half of this panel. And I think what we got out of that first piece, I want to kind of continue it on, but in a slightly different vein. So from a collaboration point of view, Patsy, let's start with you maybe. So you and I have talked quite a lot about clusters. So we've seen clusters in the Southeast. We've done different styles of clusters, and we've had some great successes, and we've got others in the pipeline that will hopefully, continue to blossom and grow. How do we actually drive forwards in terms of using those kind of clusters and that collaborative approach to bring like health and life science together? So some of the stuff we were talking about before the break, are clusters the right way to go forward to get industry working together and pulling in the same direction?
I definitely think the clusters have, and particularly within a regional basis, because obviously, clusters can be regional, national, international, but at the regional level, there's some rather practical areas for them to coalesce around. For example, in terms of the skills agenda, there is so much convergence going on, whether it's across we're taking life sciences as an example here, across the pharma, biotech, diagnostic, med device, and from David's world as well. There's a lot that's actually happening across that says the jobs of the future, the skills of the future. We really need to be getting our head around that to inform, for example, our new university in the Southeast, the Technological University of the Southeast, that there's some forum where industry can actually get together, have the right discussions, and inform the universities about where do you need to go in terms of the delivery of the skills. And similarly, the applied research and so on that's happening in those facilities, that industry understands where that applied research is going, or pure research is going, to again upskill themselves. So that's just kind of some of there are practical examples of what they can do to get together, and there's so much happening from that convergence, particularly that getting some of what's based locally. And I think you and I had this discussion, Larry, which is there's quite a lot of the facilities that would be located in the Southeast are quite a distance away from the patient and that patient focus that David has spoken about, because they're on that supply chain, again, that we spoke about, discovery all the way to the patient. Yes, they're quite a distance along that supply chain, but there's a yawning chasm from there to the patient, and they're focused on manufacturing. A lot of the time it's just manufacturing. So then you get into, lean and so on, and in terms of and business systems that you wrap around that, and again about data management around that, that again are areas that people can actually talk about. When you start moving into the biopharma world, there's the with the biopharma world, because of the amount of science involved in creating a molecule, a large, let's say, a monoclonal antibody, or the sort of the vaccine development and so on with mRNA and so on. That gets your research much closer to your manufacturing unit because there is so much science involved in the actual production of these compounds. So in those cases, there's a lot more happening within that, and completely new skill sets developing inside in the biopharma world. That again, putting those together in the one room and just getting a conversation going. Again, we've discussed this in the past. It doesn't have to be very structured meetings with, heavy topics for discussion. Some of this is about putting the right people in the room to actually speak to each other, because I know it from being a former CEO of Airgen and so on. It's a lonely enough space at the and when you're at the helm in the CEO role, putting like-minded individuals in the same room. Some of the issues they have in terms of even managing the organization, developing a strategy, painting the vision, working with the people that they have, access to talent. There's so many areas for collaboration and so many areas for just simple discussion that will help you when you get back to your own place, So
David, I think on the other end of the spectrum, we've talked about, Health Data Alliance within the Southeast and expanding it forward. We kind of touched on it a little bit before the break. You at UPMC, you've already done that with UPMC and University of Pittsburgh and Carnegie Mellon. And, is that really delivering that kind of real-term benefit? So going back to Patsy's point, absolutely, clusters and collaborative organizations are great. I harp on, I'm sure Patsy's sick to death of me saying it, is, I don't see the benefit in just having talking shops. If I want to have lunch with somebody, I'll go and have lunch with somebody and forget trying to wrap it up in some sort of guise. Is actually having some meaningful output. Have you seen out of that alliance, and if we did the same here in the Southeast, do we see that can actually have a real terms everyday benefit to the sector?
Yes, would be the short answer. You know my view on it. I think there's a very good opportunity to have an alliance or cluster. So cluster alliance, I think what the real benefit of getting organizations together around the same service industry or the same mission is to have an objective. So if a cluster comes together, what's the objective? Can we set those objectives about making a difference or adding value? I think if we had that level of focus with the key players around the table, as Patsy said, or interested people around the table, well, then what comes from that is collaboration, comes from that is discussion, learning, opportunity, relationships, I think are very important in healthcare and life sciences. I think, healthcare is a relationship game, I often say. Unless I trust somebody, I won't work with them. Unless there's fairness and respect around the table to the mission and objective, I won't work with them. You can work towards something together, but will you really get that collaboration across industry without having some basic principles? So I think to pull a cluster or an alliance together, you need basic principles, you need objectives. I think you need to be impactful, even on a small, something small, get it done kind of approach. With that ability then to be flexible to allow people to leave or to allow organizations to join. So I think there's, the good old terms of reference required. And I think, and I know there are plenty of, corporations, plenty of individuals, organizations in the Southeast that would come together to try and make an impact to the region, whether that's health and life sciences or whether it's, offering help or advice. What I find with our own organization, UPMC, is because we're so big, we've made all the mistakes. And because we're not for profit, we're quite willing to talk about them because we're not trying to protect investors and we're not trying to protect shareholders because we don't have them to protect. So we can talk and we can get right to the top in terms of the clinicians and the researchers, and they will tell you about the mistakes they've made in the years past and what they would have done differently. And I think that's very important for a cluster, very important for an alliance, is that you have to have that trust that you can talk about a problem and perhaps offer some humble advice about where it didn't work for yourself so that people around the table don't make the same mistakes. I'd love to work in that environment where you could actually, talk openly and talk about making an impact on the community, an impact in the region, an impact on health and life sciences. And believe me, you start pushing a door and two more doors open up, and then two more doors open up. And that's where then organization to organization, you start to collaborate. You don't have to bring all 15 organizations in a cluster together to do something. But what you have to do is, allow that flexibility where 2 or 3 organizations can make an impact, and then scale it up. So yeah, we've talked about it, Larry, and I think that opportunity is real. I think that opportunity is in front of us. I think the pandemic, as Jonathan and Patsy have both said, has allowed us consider the possibility of it happening quicker than we thought previously.
Jonathan, I guess from your point of view, is obviously, as you stated, you work with a wide variety of folks within this space, different companies and all that stuff. What do you feel would be their sense of willingness or want to engage in that kind of, Patsy and Dave have expressed it, what would be the level of interest to actually get into that, and what do you see as some of the barriers that we have to overcome to get people to obviously step up?
So I was just listening to Patsy and David talking there, and I was thinking about an experience I recently had where my concern was that when Repligen, and I can say this freely, my concern was that Repligen would commoditize what we're doing. So the Irish, the Waterford manufacturing base, we were just making disposables, single use, etc. So I put a proposal together to those guys that we could bring research and development into Waterford, into the southeast, into Ireland. And as I sat down, I spent some time kind of navigating through what that would look like in terms of the input from, and starting at a top level, IDA, Enterprise Ireland, and then you move down, you're into the technology gateways, you're into your group. And when I presented it about 3 months ago, they were absolutely blown away at the potential networks and collaborations, and who could get involved, who could help us, what the supports would be. But what I've found, and guys, feel free to shoot me down on this, right? But I've engaged with different clusters, Engineering the Southeast, great initiative, as an example. But there's loads of clusters, and they're all doing different things, and it's kind of, there's crosstalk between them. But there isn't this, I'm probably going to get shot for this, but there isn't this kind of joined up thinking where everybody's saying, right, okay, here is the cluster. And maybe the cluster doesn't exist where you can say, okay, well, we're representing engineering, we're representing life sciences. Maybe one size doesn't fit all, but I just feel sometimes there is a little bit of disjointed thinking. I don't know, Patsy. I know you're deeply involved with the jobs initiative, Patsy. What's your thinking on that inflammatory comment I made just there?
You don't think there's a common framework? That's kind of
I get that sensation. That's all.
Okay, Patsy.
Yeah, look, I guess that's where we're coming from within the regional enterprise plan, is to look at existing clusters that are actually there. And some of the challenges, because this is the planning phase, it's not the execution phase, but it's to look at the existing clusters that actually do exist, see how they're doing. Without going into detail, I hear exactly where you're coming from, Jonathan, in the context of the joined up thinking and so on. But also it's trying to figure out some of that collaborative stuff so that ironically, each of those clusters is not operating in a silo, which kind of, is a bit ironic, but that there's some commonality as to how they actually operate, and a recognition then if there's connections to be made across sectors and so on, because the whole point here, as David said, is it's relationships. So this is about kind of having that forum where you can actually make those connections and go, hang on, I know somebody, oh, they're not in this particular cluster, so I can't introduce you. I mean, that's, we want to get away from that kind of rubbish. But you know what I mean? People that are actually joining those dots and making those connections, because at the end of the day, we're a community. This is a community in which we operate down here in the Southeast, and that's what any of the research on clusters will tell you. There's the power in that local community, because we don't just work here, we live here, we you know someone that I know that can introduce me to somebody that's over there. That's what it's all about. And that's an Irish thing as well, to be honest. You're actually trying to build on that, which is we are into that relationships and building it out. But it is important as well that it isn't just a cluster for the sake of it. It's stuff that I would have down there in terms of the objectives for it as well. That it actually is there for a reason. There's a plan there for the cluster that they build out their plan for the next 12 months. What are they going to be organizing? What are the events? What's the actual outcomes? And can we measure against them? And if it's not working, can we go back and actually,
Yeah, and Patsy, don't think, please, for a second that I'm, criticizing the great work that everybody's doing. It's just kind of, you made a very good point there that, as the Irish are great at kind of, as you said, I know a guy down the road who can help me out with that. And we've all done it and it works very well. We need that little bit more joined up thinking. And I think the work that you guys are doing is going to glue all that together. I really do.
No, absolutely. And I think, if we take nothing else away from this panel, I think, we've got a diverse group here under conversation. I think it's fair to say we all see the benefit in collaborating in different ways. We see the landscape obviously changing going forwards, and the more we can get real-time data moving, we can get people working together, we can, create those real-time loops. So what David's seeing as, patient outcomes can get fed back into the beginning of the supply chain, we can manage that piece forwards. I think the same is also true in terms of the clusters and collaborations. It's making sure that we understand the needs of the region, of the industries that we're actually addressing, and they're not just an opportunity to have a cup of coffee. They are actually achieving things. We don't really have time to get into it a little bit more, but again, we've talked a lot about established businesses that are in there, but obviously from a cluster point of view, again, it's also how do we nurture some of that raw talent, both in terms of feeding into those businesses, but how do we bring new startups, new innovative ideas, and create that kind of nurture and mentoring side of it. Now, again, with it comes that risk. And Patsy, you and I have kind of talked about it. We've got busy CEOs and executives of large companies that have got to hit the numbers. They've got, big demands on their times and all the rest of it. They're happy to help out, but they can't just spend all of their time, mentoring startup folks. They're happy to share to a certain extent, but we got to get those kind of balances right. Right. We're coming up to the end of the session. I'd like to thank the guests that we have, Jonathan, Patsy, David. I think it's been a really worthwhile conversation. I hope you, the audience, have actually enjoyed it. We've enjoyed being here, and judging by the fact that we were given an 8-minute break to go and have coffee and a drink and all the rest of it, and nobody on the panel decided to take that opportunity. They were too busy continuing on the conversation. I think is a reflection of the passion that we actually have around this table. And I think personally, I see it as a reflection of the passion that we actually have within the region. We're all really kind of driving things forwards. As Patsy said, there's a lot of planning, there's a lot of evolution going on. David sees a lot of change happening in the marketplace that's very much reflected in the region. And I'm delighted to be part of that whole Southeast push forwards, and we're going to see that kind of driving on. To that end, I'd like to say thanks very much to the audience. It's really been great having you. And as most of you, I hope, already know, and if you haven't, I'm sure we'll be blasting you with all sorts of links and stuff going forwards, is, Waterford has been named Ireland's best place to live. Thankfully, we're all part of that. It's really been great, and we see that, and part of the reason why we're here. I was born here, so I don't have as much of a choice, but I did disappear and I came back. The likes of Patsy, who came here back in 1990, did you say, or something? Yeah, back in that, chose to actually be here and has been a big influencer on the market. Jonathan, like myself, is native born. It is a great place to live. We really enjoy it, and that's been reflected in this vote. So we've put together a little video to demonstrate that. Thanks very much, and everybody have a good afternoon.
I think the word cluster is very, very important because that signifies to anybody that's looking to come to the Southeast that there are other opportunities for them. There's over 100, I believe, tech companies at the moment based within Waterford and in the Southeast region. That as well as a wonderful quality of life, the fact that there were so many opportunities and so many different global companies within Waterford that people could move around. Waterford Find Your Future, it's a very realistic statement to make. We've now managed to grow and scale our business to a staff of over 60, and we've done all that based within Waterford. So there most definitely is a future for companies or for people if they choose Waterford as their base.
You know, there's so much here, like it's, you know, I feel very fortunate to be living here. Tremendous support. We've great staff, all local, and it's just, yeah, it's a great spot to live. So I was born and bred here and lived in a lot of places around the world, but was fortunate to get to come back to Waterford and continue our family business. It's a fantastic place to live. You know, we're 4 miles from the sea. You've Tramore, Dunmore, you've the Cumra Mountains.
We employ about 800 people here in Waterford. The company is about 100,000 people worldwide. Why was Waterford selected? It's a great location, good infrastructure, road and rail for both people and product. It's cost competitive, but mostly we came to Waterford for the people. In terms of bringing up a family, Waterford has a huge amount to offer. Great schools, both junior and senior cycle. Waterford is Ireland's best kept secret in terms of quality of life.
Waterford has certainly been a pivotal part of the company's success. We kind of often joke locally about it being a non-kept secret. We're working with some of the top health systems in the United States. We've got quite a diverse population in Waterford. We as a company have employed people with multilingual expertise, you know, speaking multiple different languages. Waterford people have a very strong work ethic, have great communication skills, good problem solving skills. You know, find your future in Waterford. I think there's lots of opportunities, whatever your interests are, you know, if it's sport, if it's the music scene, if it's the cultural scene, we've got all of that in abundance. So I think, yeah, Waterford, it's a good place to live, work and, you know, actually grow your career as well.